Everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of FRS Recruitment's Ireland is Hiring webinar series. My name is Derek Pearl, and I'm the Head of Business Development with FRS Recruitment. So over the next 40 minutes, we will provide our expat viewers considering relocating home to Ireland with essential information on shipping their belongings home, or maybe choosing to sell them instead. So our discussion is going to cover the costs, the taxes, insurances, timeframes, paperwork required, and so on, when moving everything from your furniture to your cars and even your beloved pets. So joining me today is Kieran O'Hara, all the way from Australia. Kieran is a business director with Palmers Relocations, Australia's most successful relocations business. So good day, mate.
Hey, mate, how you going? Right?
Great effort there, Derek.
Accent. So thanks, Kieran. And also joining us is Leona Fall. And Leona is our head of commercial recruitment here in FRS Recruitment. Leona herself returned from Australia about 10 years, or after 10 years being there, a couple of years back. So she's going to give her own personal insights and experience on relocating home. So before we get started on a Q&A with the guys, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Ireland is Hiring campaign. FRS Recruitment has recently launched a 70 Minutes of Ireland campaign in conjunction with the Ireland is Hiring campaign. And ultimately what that is it is a sponsorship of the GAA Go app. So the GAA Go app, if anyone doesn't know it, is the live streaming service for all of the hurling and football matches to expats all over the world. So as part of this campaign, we will promote jobs with employers across every industry and every sector in Ireland. And we have a huge number of featured employers on the 70 Minutes of Ireland website. So we'd like people to have a look at that and engage with some of the employers that are advertising roles back home. So just a little bit of history on what the Ireland is Hiring campaign is and how it started. Back in November 2018, FRS Recruitment flew a team of recruiters to Australia, and it was to meet with Irish expats at major events that were taking place across Australia. They were all diaspora events, so to speak. So there was a GAA match that we sponsored. There were concerts and picnics and really things promoting all things Irish. So we met with many expats and tried to convince them to move home. And we offered to pay for flights free of charge for anyone that we placed into permanent jobs back home. So on the back of that success, the GAA Go sponsorship gave us a much wider audience. So not just in Australia, but to be able to engage with expats all over the world and continue to bring them home into the jobs where there's major skills gaps still in Ireland. So we're going to continue to offer any expats that we place into permanent jobs free flights for the next 3 years as part of this GAA Go campaign sponsorship. So very quickly on the economy and on the, I suppose, the jobs market here. So even though we're in very challenging times and we're in a bit of a lockdown again for the next 3 or 4 weeks, there's still a major skills gap here, and we still, are reaching out to skilled workers all over the world. So if you're in IT, manufacturing, engineering, in construction trades, pharmaceuticals, science, healthcare, such as nurses and doctors, a lot of healthcare jobs here, and any operational support roles like the likes of finance, accounting, HR, sales and marketing. There's a lot of jobs here and in different parts of the country. And what's unique for some expats, I suppose, who've been away for a long time, maybe in more rural locations where there was less job opportunities, is due to the remote working rollout, I suppose, that's happened over the last 9 months due to the pandemic. There's now lots of jobs where you can work from home, working for maybe a big multinational based in Dublin where you didn't have that opportunity before. So do please keep an eye on our website and have a look at the type of roles that come up that might be originally based in Dublin, but now you have those opportunities from working from a more rural place. So to our viewers, please note that there's a chat function on your screen over here on the right-hand side. Feel free to say hello to us and feel free to ask any questions over the next 40 minutes or so. We'll respond to some of them during it or towards the end of the webinar. And anybody that we don't get to today, if there's a lot of questions, myself or Kieran will get to you afterwards. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and will live stream on social media channels such as LinkedIn and YouTube also. Okay, so that's my spiel. So let's get on with it. Kieran, thanks very much again for joining us. Can you give us a quick overview on your company and what exactly it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me as well, Derek. I appreciate it. So Palmers Relocations, we have always specialised in international moves, which kind of, I suppose, essentially started in Australia, but as you know, with the Irish community, we all kind of stick together. So it kind of expanded to the point that everyone all around the world would ask me to assist them with their relocation process. So obviously the Irish have been moving home in droves as the employment increases, even post COVID-19, 2-3 years prior to that, even the jump was just unbelievable as the economy kind of increased with that. So it went from kind of, like, I remember growing up and, you know, being in the moving industry, there was people would come over with a suitcase. So there was really, you know, not a lot of business there. But then what would happen is they'd have a family, they'd marry, they'd, you know, kind of move together, and then, you know, kind of, I suppose, long for home. And so then the process is they turn up in a suitcase and they go back with a full shipping container, a pet, and most likely a wedding ring as well. So it was it's a nice story as such. But you know, always it seems to be that especially in the last 2-3 years, as the Irish economy's boomed, so has the people returning home again to commence employment.
Super. And have you seen much of a change this year in 2020? I suppose, are relocations up or down at the moment, given the pandemic?
I'd actually say they're stable, and that's and every other country you'd say was down, but with Ireland, it's actually still up. Or if not, at least, you know, status quo. And I think because there has been so much opportunity to head home, that people have been doing it. And the only thing that's actually stopped anything has been COVID. Like, a lot of people have been saying, well, I want to go home, but I can't, for example, you know, move my pet, or I can't get a flight, or I can't get the status in order to be able to move. But in general, they still want to move home, and there's still, the inquiries have been as large as ever, actually.
Okay, good. And then just in terms of, we have a global audience that we're reaching out to.
Yeah.
So we're saying it isn't just for expats from Australia looking to relocate.
No.
And you've global partners, and I suppose the taxes and the timeframes and all that type of thing is probably very similar, regardless of what part of the world you're in.
Where you are, yeah. That's right, yeah. So I suppose in general, it doesn't matter where you relocate from. The idea is that still we manage the whole process for you. So what we kind of do is that we partner with other organizations around the world who meet what we would call a minimum standard. So no matter where you're moving from, you're still using a decent provider who's trusted and kind of has the I suppose, you know, the service levels that we require in order to organize a quotation. So you know, ultimately, when it gets to the other end, when it gets into Ireland, we have, you know, trusted partners that we use as well, who have custom cleared goods, deliver the items, whether it be cars, pets, household goods, in order to get it there. And there's always obviously as well a whole bunch of different options as well, Derek, depending on the size of the move, but also on the timeline as well.
Okay, so if you're based in the States, for example,
yeah,
you're in touch with Palmers, you'll find a partner there that has, I suppose, the minimum quality standards that you mentioned. And they start talking then in terms of costs and that. So actually, on that note, one of the bigger questions that will come through is, what are the costs, and what, like, so I know you can ship over maybe a small container or a large container. So can you talk us through the different costs for the different sizes, how much you can actually relocate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose that the easiest way to describe it is that if you have a 2 or 3 bedroom home, so you're standing kind of what we'd call a 20-foot shipping container, you allow for about, depending on where you are, but around $8,000 US is the best way of describing it. Now, yeah, it gets cheaper, it gets more expensive depending on how remote you are. But for most capital cities around the world, $8,000 will get you from door to door. So what that includes is packing, wrapping, shipping, customs clearance, delivery, assembly, basically. So you sit back and do nothing. Let the removal company do all the work for you. Of course, then you had the larger households, which are a 4-bedroom kind of, you know, plus home, which you move into a 40-foot container. Then you're looking at around 12 to 13,000 US. So people often think that if you double the size, you double the price, but that's not the case at all. There's always minimum fees, but by moving into a 40-foot container, you actually, you only pay an extra kind of maybe 20 or 30% rather than double the price that you're moving. And then, of course, there's the individuals who just have a few items of furniture, a few suitcases, a few boxes. When that comes along, you can do a shared container. So basically what that means is that your container has been shared with a whole bunch of other people who are all moving into Ireland. And then basically most moving companies wait for it to get filled, that the container as such, and then it gets sent and then delivered out to you as well. So there's kind of 3 different options. You can kind of have your own container, you can have a huge container, or you can share the shipment with someone else, especially if you're not in a hurry for it. and save a lot of money that way.
Okay, good. And actually, just on that note, then, time frame wise,
Yeah.
how long have you shared a container with someone to cut down the cost versus your own personal shipment?
Your own personal shipment. So it all depends on whereabouts you are in the world. So the US, for example, you're probably looking at about 10 weeks maximum. That's a maximum door to door. Australia, about 9 weeks door to door. Asia, about 8 weeks door to door. So a direct container will go as soon as it possibly can. It gets loaded and it gets delivered to the port within kind of 2 to 3 days of being loaded. The customs clearance side of things in Ireland's quite quick, and you can do that from rather Cork, Dublin, or of course Belfast as well. So there's the options there to get that quickly. As far as shared container, there's always an associated risk because of course you're waiting for that container to get full in order to leave. Prior to COVID, I'd say to everyone, you're looking at 3 to 4 months. Now I would say still allow for 3 to 4 months, but taking consideration there is some delay. That's a lot of time outside the control of anyone else.
That's for the shared container, 3 to 4 months, yeah.
The shared container, but a direct container will always get it there for you straight away.
Is there much of a savings?
There is if you have small volumes, absolutely there is. So if you're in what I would say a 1-bedroom apartment or less, or you happen to be bringing a few boxes, a few pieces of furniture, there's a huge saving, absolutely. So like I was saying to you before, $8,000 will do a full container. If you were to break that down and say to send 1/3 of a container, like a few bits and bobs and a few boxes, you might be looking at $2,000 door to door. And it's kind of one of those things, Derek, where when we quote it as well, and most partners, you want to make sure that you're getting the price door to door. There's no kind of hidden fees or anything along those lines. Something that we pride ourselves on.
Okay, good. And I think that's kind of going to be one of the more important parts of this webinar is weighing up the costs of selling, making a few quid before you move home, or shipping it, and how do you fare out better? So we might tackle that in a few minutes. The one that I want to talk to you about, which is we've been receiving a few questions on, is people's pets. So and I know Leona, who's joined us, has personal experience having come back from Australia and relocated 2 dogs with her as well. So Kieran, I'll start with you. Can you talk me through how that process actually works? And then I'll go to you, Leona, and you can tell us about how did your experience match up with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I suppose it's obviously a big thing at the moment being COVID-19, which has changed a lot of things because there's not a lot of flights from certain locations into Ireland. So a lot of people, believe it or not, have contacted me at the moment, Derek, and saying, look, we want to do our move, but we can't move our pet yet. And obviously a pet is a member of your family. It's not anything else other than that. So it's important for people to move their animal at the same time that they relocate as well. And it's quite amazing to see people kind of transition their travel plans purely around their pet. But in general, you normally want to get a pet that's a pet carrier who will relocate your animal door to door. So it's important they include everything in that. And a lot of times they will recommend the vet, the shots that are required, the details that are required as well. And I always recommend to people to make sure that you shop around, but also B, you follow the guidelines as well. So just to make sure that it's a smooth process there too. And make sure that, like I said before, that every single quote you receive is completely door to door, if possible. And there's a lot of worldwide providers. There's Jet Pets, there's Dog Tainers, there's a lot of companies out there. And one thing you should always make sure you check is the size of the crate. So pricing can change dramatically based on the size of the crate which the animal is actually being transported in. And obviously, you want to make sure you're comparing apples with apples, and to make sure that your animal is being safely transported as much as possible with their welfare being in mind. So that's an important function of it there as well. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you follow their guidelines for it. It's not moving into Australia or moving into New Zealand is a completely different setup because there is quarantine and there is a lot of laws associated with it. Whereas Ireland, in retrospect, is quite relaxed as long as you follow the guidelines for it. But at the moment, because of COVID-19, if you can imagine, prices have hiked purely because of the lack of flights and therefore the lack of availability. But Leona would know a little bit about that, yourself personally, to move an animal in the past.
Yeah, I think I cared more about the animals than I did about the contents. I just briefly took in the contents before I go to the animals. I did again, because when I researched the cost of the animals, I thought, okay, it's going to be more important to have cost for different types of things. So I said, okay, I'll put the money in the animals. So I did the shared container, which did take 3 months. And I wish I'd known about your company at the time, because I tried to do things cheaply, didn't take the insurances, which everyone did advise. So an awful lot of things did come back damaged. So I would probably definitely say do your research, get the insurance. I think I only shipped a few boxes, which was under the 1,000. But it was more so personal belongings. The doggies, I have 2 little cavoodles, which are like children. So I wanted them in the one container. So I used Dogtainers, who you mentioned there, which I couldn't really recommend enough. I saw a question there about the travel flight plan. They have their own set flight plans because they have partnerships with certain airlines. So they do go through Asia, which was one of the questions I saw there. So I was living in Western Australia at the time. So when they had to have a night or an hour, the little pooches needed some rest halfway through. So a vet checks on them to make sure that they're okay. So I left the day after they left, and we both arrived in Dublin the same time. Go straight to Cargo, pick them up. But there was a few little loopholes. So if you're starting to research now, make sure you're researching the dogs, because I obviously had them all, their vaccinations up to date, but they do need a rabies shot, which needs, I think it's about 8 or 9 weeks prior to travel. So if you're looking at your boxes, make sure you're looking at your dogs at the same time, because if you want to go quick, that could be an implication for you. And you must travel within 5 days of the dogs leaving. So it has to be a commercial element as such. So make sure you read the paperwork on that, because I booked a flight, a non-refundable flight, thinking I saw a cheap flight, and then realized I couldn't take the dogs at the same time. So some people can, like myself, be impulsive when they want to get home and try to think of cutting costs. And if you're want to make sure the dogs get home at the same time, it could be an expensive experience as well. But generally, they are very well looked after, and it's nice to know for some people who are dog crazy like me that they're actually on the same flight as you for the long journey home. So it's being mindful if you read the fine print.
They do a thing you do, and I actually seen that some of the pet carriers actually provide like an RFID kind of like little token that they place on the collars, because obviously an animal's relocating to a new home, it's not used to it. So if it's ever going to run away, it's going to be during that period of transition, and so that way you can scan it and it'll tell the owner that where the pet is currently located. I thought that was a brilliant touch.
Yeah, no, they do. They send on photos as well when they got out of Dubai, checked by vets. So you do feel that you're involved in their little travel plan as well. So it's great.
So one question on that one, Leona, was it worth it? Would you sell them if you had to do it all over again?
When my father heard I spent $4,000 on bringing dogs home and it cost me $1,000 to get my shelf home, there was a lot of difficult conversations, but I would, no way, I would have sold, I'd have left a house there rather than leave the dogs there. So it was, and most people are getting really into their pets at the moment, is like me. So it's, once I knew they were safe and they traveled okay, that was my priority, and once I knew that there was a company who could do that well, there was no question about the cost.
Yeah, and it's like 4,000 because you spent 1,000 on your ticket and 4,000 on the pet. Is that the norm,
So I know they look, obviously, as what you were saying there a while ago about flights and COVID delaying, they do look for flights around your travel plan, and they give you the cheapest flights with their partner provider. I think Emirates were with Dogtainers at the time. So it's really the majority is the cost. I mean, they actually same seat cost as you, even though they're a different compartment of the plane. So it was an additional 2 extra bodies on board. So they look at it as a flight cost for them. And then the additional fees around that for vets for checking them in, a night in a kennel as such. And then there's a vet that check them at the end before you get them back to make sure they're hydrated and okay. So it's an expensive little journey for them. A little holiday.
The plane, I take it, where they're stored in kind of like a kennel.
Yes, it's a separate area. Obviously, when I first thought, I was like, "There's no way they're going down to where my luggage goes." But it's a nice little compartment off the plane that's, well circulated with air, so they're not cold. I think on Dogtainers they actually have a video on their website showing where the dogs go and the whole process, which made me relax an awful lot more, knowing that they were going to be okay.
Okay. We have a timely question here actually from Sinead asking how were the dogs after the flight itself? So were they traumatized or were they? I'm not sure how you answer that because I don't think this is English.
I was more traumatized when we did have our little reunion, and it was outside the cargo station in Dublin Airport. So that was the longest drive, leaving my flight, seeing my parents. They got no hello. It was straight to pick up the dog, and it was a long cuddle. They thought they were abandoned, but the drive. I was more worried about the drive down in a car from Dublin with my dad with no sat nav than I was about the dogs the whole way home from Australia.
Well, I actually did a tour last year, and they took me through like how the pet transport process actually works, and the actual like the crate itself. And a little bit further to Sinead's question, there is that they actually normally place like a water drip system is the right wording. So they always got access to water to keep themselves hydrated during the flight, but at the same time they don't want them overdoing it either. Exactly. The idea is that you want the animal is comfortable. Correct. Yeah. So it does sleep as much as possible, but the water is available to them as well. So it's kind of like from working in the moving industry, 20 plus years, that at the start, I remember that there was always a few hassles when it came to pet transport, or concerns is the right wording. But the percentage ratio now for animals getting to the other side safely and securely, just unbelievable. They've done such a great job. It's come a long way. And so I think regardless of which provider you use, I think you're going to get a pretty good service. And I think you can rest assured that your animal's in good hands, because sure enough, bad news travels very quickly. It does. So
when I've done my research, I made sure that they were a good reputable carrier as well. So I'm happy to take any questions or emails offline on that about the experience.
Great. And Kieran, you have a list of all of the third-party suppliers and the contacts if people want to get in touch with you guys after Palmers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'd be able to provide partners for anywhere around the world. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. What the owner's kind of alluding to with her love of pets, I actually get with a lot of Irish people really came back, especially men, with their cars. So
I can imagine.
different scenario, but definitely same kind of thing. If you were to scratch a car, you'd be in a lot of trouble. And same thing if you were to upset a pet, then the same thing as well.
That brings me along nicely to the next question, cars.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's about. I'm not sure what you mightn't understand, or you probably do better than I would. The VRT system coming into Ireland, tax that might be paid. Is it worth your while bringing a car with you?
Overall, the answer is yes. Okay. The rule is that you have to have owned the vehicle for 6 months, and the key word here is owned and used the vehicle. So in other words, you can't own it for 3 months, fly back to Ireland, and then 3 months later send it. You have to show that it was in your name and that you used it. So you were there for a full 6 months with that vehicle registered or whatnot to be able to relocate at home. It is a popular thing, to be honest with you. And the reason being is that normally if you buy a vehicle, the valuing happens pretty early on in the process. So that's the first thing. Secondly, you tend to find that the vehicles you get in the US, Australia, or Asia, in comparison to Ireland, even for the same model, tends to come out with a lot of the leather and a few of the extras that you may not necessarily get back in Ireland. So that's the other reason for relocating it. And also, I think as well, is when you're trying to sell a vehicle last minute, Derek, people are going to take advantage of you, and you're in a situation where you have to sell rather than kind of take your time, because you're going to need a vehicle to run around yourself or your family prior to coming back to Ireland. But as long as you've been overseas for more than 12 months, and mind you, I'm talking outside the EU, I shouldn't mention that specifically, and you've owned it for 6 months, you can bring it in and not have to pay any VRT. And something that's two main differences, or two main kind of changes, I suppose, to the whole process with relocating a car back to Ireland is two things. That one being that there's now no limit. There used to be a limit. Let's say one per person in the family, or adult over 18 years of age. Then they moved it to 2. And recently, Ireland actually abolished that. So they've said you can bring home as many vehicles as you want, as long as you have, again, been away for 12 months and own that vehicle for over 6 months, which is amazing. That won't last forever, but it's where it is at the moment. And one really cool thing, which I thought was great, is that you can actually leave the number plate that you have on that vehicle. And when it arrives in Ireland, you can get a temporary insurance, like coverage for 28 days, which means basically you can, like, an example would be if you happen to be in Donegal and your vehicle comes to Ireland, you don't have to necessarily go down to the NCTS in Ireland to get it safety inspected and therefore registered and insured. You can actually arrive, grab the vehicle from our partners, drive it back to somewhere close to yourself, and then go through that process. So it's made a huge difference, because it just means that people, have a vehicle for 28 days. They're not having to worry about it, and and all the headaches that come with it as well. It's really, really good.
Okay, great. And it's probably worth mentioning as well, anyone who's been out of the country a long time, I suppose there's a lot of cars that you still can't get in Ireland, American cars. So I'd recommend have a look on Dundeal.ie. Dundeal probably has the biggest listing of cars in the country at this stage, and you'll see the cars that are and aren't available for sale here. So if there's a particular type of car that you think you're going to pick up here, you mightn't be able to do that. So probably worth having a look at that as well. Have you experienced that yourself, Kieran?
Yeah, the minute you mentioned Dundeal, I thought, yeah, I definitely know it. I've actually, it's got to the point, Derek, where I've actually got people relocating cars back to Ireland, paying the 35% duties as well. Like they're quite comfortable with it. New car dealers, because they are in such demand. So the big ones tend to be in the pickup trucks, like for Australia, and we have the Hilux or the Helix, whatever you want to describe it. You see a lot of the older Toyotas coming into Ireland, as well as the Japanese, the kind of Nissan Skylines, the kind of cars which are kind of fan favorites, but you can pick them up overseas quite cheap. And then when you get back home, you're going to have something that's a little unique. I always say to people the same scenario: make sure you keep the liter low. So you wouldn't bring in a 5-liter V8. You'd bring in because for insurance purposes, of course, you'd bring in something that's going to be similar and going to be able to be serviced in Ireland. It's similar to something else that's currently there, or that you're comfortable with. That it might be a hobby rather than a day-to-day running car. But then, of course, you have the other issue as well with the insurance, Derek, where a lot of people are insuring under their parents' names or someone else's names as an occasional driver, rather than directly with their name themselves, especially if they've been overseas for a period of time.
Yeah, it's one of the things I found when I came back, and I was there for 10 years. If you do know your insurance broker and you're with the broker in Australia, it's down to the language that we use in Ireland and the language that they use in Australia. I couldn't get insurance when I came back, even though I had 25 years driving experience and I had 10 years no claims bonus in Australia. They grade it differently in Australia, and because the paperwork doesn't match, our insurance companies won't back it. Now, I have heard some stories from friends who have relocated. If you can come back with the right documentation, certain insurance companies here will pass that, and certain won't. So do your research on that. And as well, the same with health insurance. Make sure to bring how many years of that you've been away. Get that paperwork in order before you come home, because it's very hard to do it when you're back here.
Totally agree with you. Actually, is that Ireland is, when it comes to the customs paperwork in general, whether it be animals, pets, or household goods, it's one of the only countries in Europe now that still does it manually. So everywhere else, you jump online, you type in your details, I'm relocating home, and they give you a kind of a reference number, and your goods get customs cleared, or your pet or your animal, or your car, sorry. But Ireland's still very manual done, so which is hilarious, as you'd agree, but it's very Ireland. So all
in the language.
Spot on. So we tend to kind of the documentation is by far the most important thing. Like, for example, if you want to move your household contents over, they want to see information to show that you've been in, whether you've been overseas. So they ask for information like it be utility bills or phone bills or rental agreements, anything to show that you've been away. And they actually ask you to show something that was 12 plus months within the last month of you leaving, and then something in between. So thankfully these days we get emailed everything, so we can keep copies of it. But if someone happens to be sharing an apartment, having a prepaid phone, these kind of things, it does become a little bit difficult for them at times.
Okay. And on that note, Kieran, is there one place that people can go? Because it gets confusing when you start bringing in all the manual paperwork and the compliance that's needed. So if you're starting from day one, where do you start? Is there one place where you can see all of that's required and get the process moving, and how long does it take?
Yeah, good question. So with that one, Derek, what I always say is that anyone who's relocating, have someone pop around. Okay, so send an email, look, whether it be to myself or someone else who kind of specializes in household goods. General freight companies are good at what they do, but there is a bit of a drama there because there is so many kind of cowboys in that industry. So you kind of want to work with someone who knows what they're doing. So you first of all, you make an initial inquiry via an email, then you have someone actually pop out and have a look at what you're moving. Look, a few boxes, different scenario. But if you're moving furniture and things like that, have someone come out, have a look at it. And then as well, you can make a decision based on kind of A, price, but also B, how you feel about the whole process. Because they can normally run you through it, right in front of you at your home. So because ultimately, when you're shipping goods, it's based on volume. Okay, so how much space you're taking up. And you want to make sure that everything's, accounted for, and make sure it's a full door-to-door service, not we'll get you to Ireland from there, you look after it. It's, you want to make sure that every single cost is accounted for. So having someone pop over is worthwhile. Once they've popped over, then you get the quotation. And I always say to everyone, as much as you want to pack everything yourself because you think you save a few dollars, it's actually not worth it in the long run for a few different reasons. One was insurance, which Leona kind of alluded to earlier, but also from a customs clearance perspective, because Irish Customs ultimately will look and say, okay, if you've packed this yourself, we're going to check it because you're saying one thing, but we don't know who you are from ourselves, so we're going to check it out. Whereas if the moving company packs it, they take responsibility ultimately. So I recommend having someone pop out and have a look at everything, give you a volume. When you do get your quotation, check the volume, but also check the items listed. Make sure they haven't left anything off, so that you know that what you're getting has been accounted for, and make sure that it is a full door-to-door service. And you normally, Derek, depending on the situation, but you'd want to kind of try and organize this about 60 days out from the move, rather than kind of 2 weeks beforehand or even 12 months beforehand, just because too far in advance, fuel surcharges happen. 12 months ago we didn't have COVID, did we? So that is an example. But you want to make sure you give yourself enough time that you can shop around, see what options are out there, and then make an informed decision.
I couldn't recommend that highly enough. I did it myself, and the boxes and the paperwork arrived without any knowledge or expertise. Yeah. And the paperwork is quite daunting, Derek. You get piles and piles. You have to list everything in automation by item, verify that you've checked it, and you're really filling out a book. The fact that when I sent back my boxes the first time, I did all the paperwork incorrectly, so it all came back to me again, and it delayed it by another 4 weeks. So I really do think knowledge and expertise at the start of the process to educate you what really you can take and what's best not to take, and how you actually even do the paperwork out correctly that will go through customs to minimize any delays, is probably the tip of the day. Because when I did it myself, trying to cut costs, I did it the wrong way around. So getting someone to look over the paperwork is really, really important.
It's funny. You actually send out an email now, Leona, to people saying, here's how you fill out the form. An actual guide to it, because I find that there's a lot of components of the form which actually aren't relevant to the person.
It's very confusing because they bring in the cars, that have you emptied the oils from your cars, have you done this, have you done that? And I was shipping bed linen and clothes, and you feel like you have to go. It sounds quite basic, but it's a really, really tedious process when you're looking at this documentation, when you're probably thinking about your dogs, seeing your family, saying goodbye to friends, and this form can be quite overwhelming at the time. So it's always good to get someone who knows how to fill out the form to do it for you.
And submit it, on your behalf, spot on.
Yeah.
So both your recommendations are in line. So
don't do paperwork.
I'll help me do it for you. Okay, that makes sense. The 60 days ties in nicely actually with the recruitment process as well, from job offer to relocation over. So it's nice to be able to line up new job, shipping, paperwork,
all around the same time.
etc. So that might answer one of the questions that came up earlier, is this time frame really around the whole kit and caboodle. So, and there's another question actually, and I'm just going to take it from Siobhan, talking about relocating in 2021, and she mentioned the do's and don'ts. So that might be referring to what you can and can't ship and what to avoid.
Sure. Okay, so for that one there, I think it comes down to the basics. Try and keep anything like drugs, ammunition, pornography outside of the shipment, okay? Believe that's actually the guideline for Irish customs. So I'm not just kind of making that up. But
Definitely no area.
the ironic one is alcohol. Don't bring alcohol into Ireland, which is hilarious. But because the tax is quite high. So if you can avoid relocating alcohol, I recommend doing it. Unless of course it's something that's it's a special to yourself. As far as that, the main thing that the Irish government are looking for, well, is to make money, really. That's what they're looking for. And the main one on that is tools. So it's a big question we get asked all the time. Can we relocate our tools home? Now, the basic rule of that is that if it's for commercial use, okay, so you're going to earn revenue off relocating these tools home, then yes, you are going to be taxed on that. And it is it's a thing that's really important as well, because in general, the tools you can get from overseas in comparison to the tools that are available to you in Ireland, the price difference is enormous, as well as the quality side of things as well. So the Irish government is looking to tax that. Now, it's not a situation where you can kind of say, I'm going to be working at my farm at home. I'm bringing a jackhammer. I'm bringing a digger. I'm bringing these kind of things. And get away with it. They are specifically looking for it. Now, obviously, there's ways around everything, of course, but it's got to be within reason. So I always recommend speak to the local company that you're relocating with and ask them the question, I'm bringing home these tools. Am I going to get that through duty free? Because I mean, if you were moving home a whole household of furniture, and within that household of furniture, you had bits and bobs, you had a garage worth of goods, and you had tools that you may use on a day-to-day basis, that's fine. But if you're bringing home a container of tools and you've got a television and a lounge, it's not gonna fly that well. So it's important to have that conversation beforehand and be prepared that there is some heavy duties associated with that.
Okay.
Two questions actually came into us. Both were on tools over, actually. One from Daniel and one, no, actually, both from Daniel. And I know you said it's very expensive. Any idea how much those taxes might actually be on top of on top of the shipping costs?
In general, 35%.
Okay, and is that 35% the rule of thumb for because you mentioned 35% for new cars as well?
Yeah. So it actually is 20% plus 10%, but when you put it into reality, it becomes about 35% of the value you declare. Now, obviously, it's in your best interest to keep that value low, but you can't take the mickey either. So you've kind of got to say, you can't turn around and say that your tools that were $20,000 worth were worth $5,000. That's ultimately the actual ruling by Irish Customs is what they deem it to be worth. So you've got to be a little careful there. If you have receipts, beautiful. That'll obviously cover a hell of a lot of that off. But you've just got to be mindful of that it is present. But what you can also do is, if you are using these tools of trade, you can do a transfer of business. So you can transfer your business from whatever country you're in into Ireland. And when that happens, because obviously then Irish Customs and Irish Revenue are bringing in revenue, and you're creating employment in Ireland, you can bring items over and pay no duties whatsoever, because you are establishing a business and you are creating employment in Ireland. It just takes a little bit more planning, Derek. So I normally say for that one, if you are transferring a business, you kind of start that about 90 days before relocating.
Okay, so there are, I suppose, grey areas and technicalities, and again, and this isn't a plug for your business. We brought you because you're an expert in this area, and you're in business so long. But ultimately, whether it's you guys or a competitor, which we prefer not to talk about, but the advice would be there are technicalities, there are grey areas, and to speak with a shipping company like yourself to figure out what those taxes are. And as you said, like if you're self-employed and moving a business over, you don't pay tax. So there's I suppose there's really, isn't there?
Yeah. There's so many ways. There's so many ways to make it work for you. And I got to give Ireland the credit. They're very good at kind of at working in with you if you provide the information up front and you are organised. I mean, an old kind of thing that used to happen all the time, Derek, was that people would move things through Belfast. That was the old thing, is that move through Belfast, I won't pay duties and I can bring them into Republic. Well, obviously, like any kind of loophole, that gets closed down. So that's now gone. And so I think it's always a situation of being upfront, being honest, and then kind of making that work for you. You never make a guarantee, but of course the idea is to minimize the damage that you're going to receive at the other end, and make it work for the family as well.
Okay. So actually, your own personal experience then, Leona, when it comes down to shipping or selling,
Yeah.
did you see, I suppose one of the things in Ireland is rental houses in particular, a lot of them come furnished. Now the furniture
Yeah.
mightn't be what you're used to because it's a rental property. So you're not gonna, unless you're paying, a lot of money.
The Australian furniture, I don't feel will fit in most Irish homes anyway. We're scaling down when we move home, which is a good thing. But I do think, Derek, I mean, I was in a unique situation. I was coming home for family reasons, and as I touched on earlier, it was more about, personal memories and tokens, and the doggies were my priority at the time. Now, I sold so much on Facebook Market, on Irish around Perth, Irish around Australia, because it's such a transient community. The amount of people that are always coming and going. So I had about 5 Irish new families who'd come into my house and literally fight over taking as much as they possibly could to start a home. So putting it up in these groups, someone always knows someone who's just arriving, someone knows someone who's always going, and it's a very good way to get, I suppose, nice tax-free cash in your hand, and then that actually does help pay for the other stuff that you're facing. Like the travel and the cost of dogs. And also, guys, don't remember to forget our tax years differ in Australia and Ireland. And if you stop, it runs from April to April over there. And so, if you're stopping working, you can still claim to the end of the year. Make sure you lodge that with the tax office in Australia. So I think I got another 3,000 or 4,000 back from that because I'd only worked a couple of months in the year. So there's ways to recoup costs that will support what you're paying to get home, depending on the time of year that you are traveling. So don't forget about the tax, selling what you can. Again, if it's a whole family who went over as a single person coming back with 2.4, maybe it is worth getting the full shipping container because the cost over there for furnishings and lifestyle goods is cheaper than it is here. So my advice I was only coming, I had a house here, I had stuff that was rented fully furnished, so I had a base to come home to. But if I didn't have a base and I had everything I did have, and after this webinar, I probably would have done a full container. It just depends on everyone's personal circumstances and where they are at any given time, really.
Container with it. And if you're buying a house, that's largely empty. It's only, I suppose, for people who might be looking at renting long term, they'd have to weigh up will the furniture and that in a temporary situation, maybe for a year or two renting, worth their while selling over, or if they're particularly nice things, they might just want to move out the stuff that they're moving into.
Exactly, that's important to them.
Yeah. Okay. I think the other component as well there, Derek, is that when people are relocating home, having furniture around you that you're familiar with. Do you mean that you know that reminds you of a time in Australia, wherever it may be, that's a little unique to maybe what you would see in Ireland, does make a difference. And I think Leona's right. If you're going to organise something, like she was saying, if she turn back time, if you're going to do it, I think you do it all in, or you don't. You make the call either way. If you know you're going to have to purchase furniture back in Ireland, you'd bring whatever you had from whatever country you may be in, because chances are you're going to save money. And if you're moving 20% or 30% of what you want to relocate, chances are the gap between kind of adding everything isn't going to be so large. But when you get back there, you don't really have the option. Like it's too late then, isn't it? So the familiarities around you is something that's a really nice thing.
Okay, good. And one thing that we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier on, but we kind of briefed over on it. The insurance, you had some problems with insurance. So you said some of the goods arrived that were slightly damaged, Leona. So did you take out insurance yourself at the time for your personal shipment?
So there is a standardized on the form that you can tick what you value it to be and what then because my focus was trying to do it cheaply, which I highly regret now. I posted like some of the memorables for me. So all the kind of the like pictures, ornaments, gifts I'd been given. And even though I had wrapped them intensely with bubble wrap, where they were all broken, and because the box that I had valued was maybe to a $500 amount, and that would be the box where I had the DVD player, and this that was already over that amount, I'd lost everything. So even what you put in a box, some people will be packing quite reactively and just putting a number on a box to say this is what it's valued, but you might put something in there that will up that value. And if something's damaged, it won't fall within the insurance bracket. So the best tip is get a professional to do the packing or show you the paperwork and the importance of ticking a certain box on that paperwork, because I would have lost an awful lot more than what I tried to do by saving, doing it myself.
Okay. And if you've very little to read, is there anything worth posting?
Sorry, Derek, I missed that.
If you've very little to relocate, you haven't been gone that long, and you've sold everything, is there anything worth posting or safe to post?
Anyone posting? Well, no, if people are in Australia, you don't post anything. I used to post homes. My mum came to visit me once and she fell in love with this Australian chocolate bar, and I posted her home 10 small little, what we call dairy milks, and it cost me $80. You don't post from Australia. You just don't do it. It's cheaper to ship it and take 3 months than to use Aussie Post.
When this is done, Leona, let me know. I'll ship a whole bunch over for you, okay?
Yeah, the posting is, I mean, even Christmas time over there, if you wanted to post 10 Christmas cards, it's very expensive to post from Australia. So you just, and I'm sure everywhere else, like we've got some audience from the States and from the Middle East, I'm sure it's the same way, but it's how they make their money from their expat community. You just don't bother. I stopped doing Christmas cards the past 10 years, and I haven't even reinitiated that since I've been home, because I'm the trauma from posting.
I had a girl, a couple I relocated back to Ireland from Mexico, actually, and they said, can you, she wants to send her husband some beer that he really enjoyed. Yeah. And I suggested, I shipped the beer over, just a favour, didn't charge him a cent, but the Irish Customs jumped in and literally, I think it was about €120 for a case of beer. It was unbelievable. But
yeah, it's an expensive exercise.
Fair enough. And if you don't mind me interjecting on the insurance side of things, because it's something that I'm really familiar with, and to be honest with you, it is kind of standardized around the world. There's a few things there. What I always recommend to anyone, one is always itemize what you want to insure. Where you say this item's worth this item's worth this, rather than taking a blanket cover. And I think that way, you kind of, if in companies that accepted your insurance, they've accepted that value, so they can't kind of negotiate with you later on, like the $500 per box that you were just told there. Leon, that's terrible kind of thing. Yeah. And the second one is to make sure that the moving company pack the goods, because that way they're taking owners, and they can't say, oh, well, you've told me it's worth X amount, but we don't know what damage it was like when it went into that box. I think that way you kind of cover out for any kind of gray areas there to make sure that you're fully protected against that. Insurance is important, but at the same time, I always say to people that don't go overboard. You got to assess a few things. One being the risk. So obviously, if you're moving something that's a strong, big piece of furniture, the chance of damage to that compared to a television is completely different. But just to itemize, insure it for what it's worth, and ask yourself the question: if it gets damaged, will I get back what I what I deserve for it? And is actually the premium worthwhile doing? Because what tends to happen is a lot of companies will say, here's our insurance policy, but if you want to take out mechanical derangement, which is where an item arrives, it looks fine, but it doesn't turn on. It might cover for that. It might cover for electrical derangement, mold and mildew, pairs and sets. And like pairs and sets, the example, if you had 6 dining chairs and one was to be damaged, well, are they going to cover you for the other 5 as well, or are they only going to cover for the one? And of course, you got to look at those things and make sure that you're getting everything included, and do a full assessment on it. I think it's important to make sure you look through the policy in complete detail, so you know what's involved in it. Yeah, and more importantly, guys, make sure that when you sign the document at delivery, you're checking to make sure that what you've received is on that paperwork and in the condition that it left in as well. Look, in Ireland, I partner with a company called a lot of time in Dublin called RAS, and they're really good like that. They'll actually grab the client by the hand and walk them through the house, and they'll say, okay, can you have a look? Is everything the way you want it to be? Is everything unpacked? Are you happy with the works? And then the client signs off on everything. And I just find that, giving the customer the extra 2 or 3 minutes to make a decision, because it's a big thing. They're moving to a new home. There's a lot going on. There's people running in and out with boxes and setting up furniture for them. That it allows them to then kind of make an accurate assessment. And if you kind of fix problems on the spot, you find people are pretty good. Like, they're quite happy with it. You put your hand up and say, listen, we just moved in your dining table. There happens to be a scratch on the edge of it there. we're going to fix it up for you. And they're really, really happy that way. Whereas when you try and kind of hide things or do things on the cheap, that's where problems occur.
Yeah.
Great advice. We're into our last 5 minutes. What I'd like to do is tackle a few more of the questions that came in on the Q&A. I believe we've covered a lot of them, like VRT and the process there from Garrett, which we have. There was a question about bringing, I believe, a staffie from Australia to Ireland. What do we need to do? So we've gone through, I suppose, relocating a pet. But there was a specific question there. Do we avoid certain routes like the UK and the Middle East?
No, I mean, your airline will tell you about that. I mean, for me, I wanted them to travel the route I was traveling. And the dog trainers had connections with Emirates. So they picked the route, but generally from Western Australia, it was always kind of Middle East, Heathrow, Dublin. So that was my general route home always. Now, I've never known any other reasons to avoid. I do know they need to, if it's from Australia and if you're going to the UK or if you're going over a 10-hour flight, they have to come off the flight, obviously, to hydrate and get some rest. So I don't know about avoiding any particular routes, but I know they would need to have a stopover. We can't do the 17-hour direct with animals.
Fair enough. Okay. And there's a specific question just from Daniel around the power tools, and it was: is there a difference between shipping tools and shipping power tools in terms of?
Yeah. In general, Derek, so what I would recommend to anyone who's relocating is that you check the voltage. That's the first thing you do. So, most countries outside the US, it's okay to relocate anything home. What you want to do though is make sure that when you are using the adapters, so from an overseas power point to an Irish power point, that's okay for short term. Okay, the ones you pick up at the airport, those multiple adapters, but they are cheap plastic items. Ultimately, they're not meant for long term use. So if you are going to bring home your appliances, just pay for an electrician to come around, and he'll cut the plugs and put the local power point on there. It's really important when it comes to things that have got motors or elements. So toaster, kettle, washing machine, dryer, these kind of things. As long as you change over the plug, majority of the time you're fine. And actually, a lot of the time, the electrical items at the back have got a little switch where you can switch between your voltages.
Yeah.
So for example, from Australia, it's 240 volt on 230. There's no drama there. And USA a little different because it's 120 volt. But you just that's right, yeah. So you just assess it. But I always say that don't leave the plug. The other problem with the plug as well is that when you have them all the time, they are bulky. So because they're bulky, they're always hanging out a little bit. And those are actually things that fail before the appliance does. So I mean, it's very cheap to have someone come around, cut a few plugs.
I think Sinead touched on that as well about what happens with white goods. And I was the same. My prized possession, which came the whole way, was my Thermomix, and I was the first plug that had to be changed. Was my Thermomix, and it's still working. Yes, she's working fine. 2 years home this month, so and she's working fine. But yeah, it's my hairdryer still. Now I won't lie, I have the adapter on the hairdryer. I haven't had that plug changed out yet, but we're kind of lucky the voltage difference isn't too much different here. So you get an electrician, change out the plugs, stuff that isn't important like hair dryers. I've done it the girl way and just still use the adapter, but the Thermomix was too much of a priority in my life to not change out the plug.
It depends on how long you're using the hairdryer for. That's really what it comes down to, is the time that's working. Like the hairdryer you use for a period of time to dry your hair, but it's not like a refrigerator you may have on all day long. So it depends on the setup. But it's funny you mentioned the Thermomix there. It's kind of the rule I have is that you never want to upset a thermo. If you damage a Thermomix or a kid's kitchen, those are the two things that families really care about. Yeah, it's and I always say to everyone who's relocating, we actually give everyone a special box which has got for the wires for the television and remote controls, because you can imagine you get to the other end, you're having this big removal, and you just want to find a remote to the television on and keep the kids occupied while everything else happens. If you're missing that, you're in a bit of trouble.
In trouble.
Very good. I have more of a statement than a question in from Art saying you have a shocky Aussie accent, Kieran, by the way. Is there anything behind that?
No, I get that a lot, actually. I'm the first in my family born in Australia, actually. So I always get it all the time. Everyone's going, if I'm in the States, everyone says, "Oh, you're English," and I'm like, "I'm from an island not far from there." Especially when they say, "What's the name of that island?" and you say "Islands," and they just look at you funny. But it is a bit of a strange one. So I admit that straight away.
Thank you very much.
From the Irish people with the accents.
That's right.
I think we've covered the next question. Art was also asking, how do they get goods over to you? But you actually come and collect the goods.
Yeah.
No one ever sends you.
No one ever drops the furniture really over to myself. We go over and we collect it for them and bring it back.
Okay, good. And last question is again from Sinead, and based on pets. Pets seems to be a big topic today. Are there any certain breeds or exotic pets that you'd have run into troubles with bringing over?
No, I mean, I had cavoodles, so they're not exotic or they're not dangerous. So no restrictions on me. Now I know obviously Australia have restrictions on certain breeds, as do Ireland. I'm sure that once your pets meet certain, I wasn't told of any restrictions anyway from memory. But you'd follow the code to each country that you're bringing your dogs into and make sure that, I know there's certain dogs that need to be muzzled, and if that's the case, they're muzzled and they're home safely, and then they're muzzled when they're here. But it's not something I have much research into because it wasn't an issue for me. But you'd be guided by that if it was from the carrier.
Okay. Any experiences on that note, exotic pets?
I tend to find that the people who relocate their pets home are friendly, lovely animals. So
yeah,
I know that. I think it's called it's a pink nose animal. Trying to name the breed, not people, but there is a few animals that are banned from Australia.
English Bull Terrier, isn't it?
That's it, yeah. And they seem to be the same standard to Ireland as well. So whatever's kind of banned in most countries, you tend to find it is banned in Ireland as well. But that's a quick Google research, do you know what I mean, and find out exactly what it is prior to relocating. But most countries seem to follow the same kind of guidelines you find as well.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us towards the end of our webinar today. So I just want to thank both Leona and Kieran for joining me. That was really informative, and I know it's quite a technical subject, so there's probably going to be a lot of follow-on questions afterwards. And we're happy to field questions ourselves, and obviously people can log on to Palmers Relocations and send some queries your way by email as well. I take it, Kieran.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime I need anything, I'm here to help. It doesn't matter where you're relocating from. If I can help you out, I certainly will.
Great. We'll have an e-sign coming out soon as well that we send out to people who register on Crowdcast as part of the service. And we'll share, I suppose, this webinar across the likes of your social media channels like YouTube and LinkedIn. So people can watch this episode back or pass it on to some friends or colleagues who might be interested. And for anyone just joining us for the first time today, this is episode 5. So in the previous 4 episodes, we covered other subjects like getting mortgages and financing and all the banking side. We were speaking with AIB there a number of weeks back. We spoke to a company about social welfare and work permits for partners that mightn't be Irish citizens, and what social welfare is available to people when they relocate over here, such as childcare, etc. And the first topic we covered then was the jobs market, and we spoke to a number of our recruiters in FRS recruitment about each individual sector, from IT to engineering, healthcare, construction, etc., to give kind of an overview of what's going on in the market. So it's worth having a look at FRS Recruitment's website and having a look at some of those webinars if you're relocating over, or just reach out to any of our recruiters and they can send some information your way afterwards. And also, it was to wrap things up, our 70 Mins of Home, which is posted on the right-hand side here of the Q&A. will show you the featured employers. We've many more employers that were on board, but we have featured employers that are giving a little bit of information about their company and the culture and, you know, the opportunities and the projects that are coming up as well. So some of them have a list of live jobs that are here at the moment, and some are just talking about the roles coming up in the future. So please have a look at 70 Minutes of Home, and you'll see some good content around this whole GA Go campaign, the sponsorship, and how FRS Recruitment as a company can help expats all over the world to relocate home, giving a very holistic service, not just a recruitment service. So that's it for today. So thanks again,
everyone.
Thanks, Leona. Thanks, Kieran. And
thanks, John. Thanks, FRS.
Thanks to everybody for logging in and watching.
Take care.
All the best.